In this video series, we are going to explore the foundations of modern architecture according to one of the greatest architects. Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, or Le Corbusier, is a Swiss architect that contributed and pioneered modern architecture and city planning. In his book, Towards New Architecture, Le Corbusier describes the deteriorating state of architecture versus the rise of the engineers during the industrial boom of the early 19th century. He goes on to explain that engineers rely on the laws of nature and mathematical forms to build their factories and machineries. The factories built by the engineers at the time are a better form of architecture than the houses and towns designed by the architects. Architecture is heavily influenced by styles and customs, limiting the true role of architecture in the city and society. Styles are sometimes, but not always, pretty and never anything more. However, architecture has higher ends, and it should impress the human instincts. The architect should be able to arouse emotions, leading to a satisfactory condition for the people exploring his architecture. The genius of Le Corbusier was his ability to join his Cubist art philosophies with his mathematical analytical mind. So to solve the issue of the architects, he wrote about the three reminders that architects should come back to: mass, surface, and the plan. First, architecture is a masterful play of masses that we see in light. Le Corbusier argued that the primary forms are the forms that our brains mostly appreciate. Egyptian, Greek, and Roman architecture is based on prisms, cubes, cylinders, pyramids, and spheres. On the other hand, Gothic architecture is made from complex forms. And when a form gets too complex, it will require additional decoration, such as the use of ornaments and foliage, which will downgrade the purity of the mass and the design of the architect. The job of the architect is to preserve the purity of the geometry in his projects. If you are enjoying this video so far, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Okay, moving on. The second reminder to architects is the proper use of the mass surfaces. Surfaces envelope the masses and should follow the geometry directing lines. To simplify this idea, let's consider the mass as the architectural structure of the house, the temple, or the factory. The surfaces of that factory are in most cases the doors and the windows. These openings are basically the deconstruction of the pure geometry of the mass and are in rivalry with it. The challenge of the architect is to modulate the surface while preserving the purity of the geometry. You can check out the architectural works of Raphael and Bramante to clearly understand the use of pure geometrical shapes in buildings. The final reminder is the use of the plan. The plan is the generator of architecture and the element that requires the best of the architect's imagination. Also, let us use an example that Le Corbusier described in his book to clearly understand the importance of the plan in modern architecture. If you are in a city where the buildings are made out of pure masses, the grouping of these masses is positioned in a clear rhythm, and the relationship of these masses to the space is in the right proportion. Then your eye will transmit to your brain the sensation of the scenery, and your brain will derive from this sensation a feeling of satisfaction of a higher order. The job of the plan is to coordinate the play of masses in rhythmic fashion, invoking the brains of the people, and this is the real role of architecture. This video only scratched the surface of this book, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when we release future parts of this series. You can check our previous videos for the ideas of other great minds like Francis Ching and Vitruvius. Thank you for watching. In our previous video, we went through Le Corbusier's thoughts on modern architecture as laid out in his book, Towards New Architecture. Today we will be looking at Le Corbusier's lessons derived from Rome. In less than 20 pages, Le Corbusier managed to scan through the evolution of Rome as a city, from its birth to our present day. We should consider ourselves lucky to have access to the thought process of one of the greatest architects looking into one of the most fascinating cities. Going back to his ideas on rejecting the decorating nature of styles, he naturally rejected the architecture produced by the Renaissance or the Byzantium period. And since Rome architectural scenery fell asleep after the Renaissance, it is now perceived as the current state of the city studied by most students. To him, the study of Rome is tricky and should not be attempted by students or the half-educated. Architecture students should not start their education in Rome, since it will cripple them for life. The bazaar of different architectural styles that this city holds should be investigated by the wise only. During his studies, he managed to uncover hidden gems, and some argue that Rome and these gems did influence his work. They said that his fundamentals on modern architecture are in a way derived from analyzing Rome. Before taking a step backwards to lay out this section of the book the same way Le Corbusier did, please consider hitting the like button and subscribe to our channel. The early Roman people were brutal, with an enormous desire to dominate. And since the city lacked any town planning, the early Roman city walls were too crowded. The houses were piled up to 10 stories high, and the city was in general all huddled together. After that period came the conquering of Greece, and it brought with it the Greek appreciation of simple forms and mathematical harmony. Briefly after that, some beautiful structures started to rise outside the city where they had more space to work with. One of these structures are Hadrian's Villas. Le Corbusier considered it as the first Western attempt for planning on a grand scale. Throughout the villas, the Romans showed their understanding for the architecture fundamentals of arrangement. Unfortunately, arrangement is one of many foundations for architecture and is not enough to create emotional, moving architecture, so he did not consider the villas a success from an architecture standpoint. Soon afterwards, the Roman engineers started inventing new methods of constructions, and with it did impressive things. By combining their intact operations, clear aim, and classifications, they built immense cupolas held by Roman cement, and they proved that they are great builders. The Roman mindset was changing, their legislation and strategies. And since architecture is a byproduct of these factors, new impressive buildings started to pop up. Buildings with the pure shapes that he surely appreciated. The Pantheon, the Colosseum, the Aqueduct, the Basilica of Constantine, and the Baths of Caracalla. The architecture of the Roman Empire was different from ancient Rome. It was clear and focused, with a single idea and without verbosity. One can argue that we owe the Roman creativity the creation of brick, cement, and travertine. Fast forward some centuries later, Rome fell under the Byzantium Empire, and back into the horror of styles, gilded palaces, and ornamented architecture. But at that period, the Greek managed to offer Rome another gift of architecture, the Church of Saint Marie in Cosmedine. He saw in this church all what we aspired for as a modern architect, from its pure geometry, simple use of materials, and its sense of relationship. You can sense in his writings that Le Corbusier was somehow enjoying the mocking aspect of this beautiful church, standing proud and simple in the city of the noble Romans with their ornamented palaces. Through the Renaissance and its horrors for architecture, as he called it, Le Corbusier admired the work of Michelangelo and considered him a man that can be found once every 1,000 years. For him, Michelangelo overshadowed the classical epoch. After his passing, Rome fell asleep for the last time and hasn't woken up since. Tell us in the comments below what architect, book, or architecture idea you would like us to cover, and check our previous videos for more valuable contents. Thank you. Le Corbusier had a simple definition for revolutions. When the new mindset and tools are set against the past, we will have a revolution. During the 19th and 20th century revolutions, by this definition, were all over the place. Le Corbusier was in a constant quest to eradicate the architecture of the past. His mission was to replace the architecture of styles with the new social order that the industrial advancements had brought. Before we dig deeper into the ideas he presented in this section of his book, it is important to keep in mind that he was a man that loved order and was encircled with controversy. If you want to learn more about this, you can look up his plans to destroy El Raval in Barcelona, or his master plan for the city of Addis Ababa after it fell in the hands of the fascists. Tell us what you think in the comments below, and please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. With that mentioned, let's move on. The industrial progress was blazingly fast at that period. Productive workspaces in the factories, the offices, and the banks brought a new sense of efficiency and quality to the life of the workers. He claimed that societies from 4,000 years ago up until the 18th century had a simple, stable structure for most of the time. The man of the past was in control of the tools that automatically met the needs of the society. And because of that, the evolution of societies was slow. He rose with the sun, slept at dusk, worked in a small booth with his family around him. Like snails in a home made exactly to his measure, there was nothing to induce him to modify the state of things. Work was organized under the family unit. The man of today, on the other hand, is living in a world of mass production, cars, and airplanes. Each person is tied to his machine. The spirit of the working family unit no longer exists. For years, the worker will do repetitive small tasks under the supervision of a strange foreman. In order to feel pride, workers need to understand the collective value of their work, since they don't see the finished product as it moves in assembly lines. On the other side of the coin, his home, town, and cities, on the other hand, are still following the past. The houses lacked good lighting, water, and air quality. Buildings are stacked together in mid-century rows. Man is using machines to create pure work of engineering to advance the quality of life, while the machine he lives in is in need of replacement. Le Corbusier believed that the new advancements changed the population mindset. Mass production created mass desires. Desire for luxury and the relaxation of their minds and bodies after long working hours during the day. And since the workers are not able to fulfill their desires while living in the houses of the past, they will not in turn pursue their instinct to form families. Due to that, the family will be killed, and that in turn will destroy the society. So, if legislators do not allow the city to move into the modern era, surely there will be a revolution, and it is only avoided with architecture. If you haven't watched our previous videos, we highly encourage you to do that now. Our package is full of architectural book summaries and philosophies to help you expand your knowledge. Thank you. In the 1920s, a habitation law passed by the war devastated France's government to build around 500,000 homes. The law stated that these dwellings should be built well and on a low budget. Le Corbusier believed in introducing mass production strategies that were already perfected by the industrial sector as the proper answer to this crisis. In our previous video on architecture and revolution, we discussed his idea of man specialization and humanity attachment to the machine. That coordination between man and machine was not introduced to the housing sector until after the end of World War I. Industrialization was already the main driver for most of the trades included in making houses. Advancements already started in water supply, lighting services, and central heating technologies. The housing structure, on the other hand, was still a thing of the past. Stones were drawn on heavy horses carried toward a yard. A mass of human labor unloaded them onto the scaffolding, placing them in position, making lengthy adjustments to each face, taking years to build. If the proper tools were used, houses could be built in a few months. Le Corbusier, in this chapter, hinted at what would later be known as his 5 points of architecture. At the time of this writing, Villa Savoy was not yet built, but he mentioned the new discovery of building houses in molds by pouring in liquid concrete from above, like filling a bottle. Le Corbusier was hoping that society will dump the building-to-measure system that dominated the past thousands of years, and that the decent house is a status of the rich only. The mass-produced house is a tool that should be accessible by everyone. His vision was interconnected. The simplicity of the assembly lines that the car and the airplanes industries took advantage of to create beautiful machines is also possible in the construction of our homes. The only thing in the way of having the same systems in the making of the dwelling is the right state of mind, as he called it. The state of mind of the people to accept living in mass-produced homes. To live in machines as well designed as the machines he uses every day to travel or to work. To accept the modular system of building that respect the modern human needs. What is mass-produced homes? It is the ideal system of building we use, or at least try to reach nowadays. It is the framework of reinforced concrete, cavity walls, doors, windows, all built to a standard unit of dimension. It is the ability to break down the house construction into smaller parts, each assigned to a specialist. The buildings themselves can be repetitive modules, laid out in a well-devised plan. The plan can bring the beautiful aspect to the simple forms, while the simplicity of the structures guarantees the cost effectiveness. Contrary to the common belief, the 5 points of architecture are not part of this book. However, the chapter of mass-producing housing of this book did lay out the foundations for this manifesto. So, it is only common sense to have a brief explanation of these points, since they embody the modern construction techniques that lead to the development of the modern cities. We start by the columns, which are the replacement of the supporting walls, laid out in a grid of reinforced concrete. They bear the structural load of the building. Second point is for the free designing of the ground plan and the absence of supporting walls, which means that the house is unrestrained in its internal use. Third point is to the free design of the facade. By separating the exterior of the building from its structural function, the facade is free from the structural constraints. The horizontal windows cuts the facade along its entire length and lights the room equally. And finally, gardens on a flat roof can serve a domestic purpose while providing essential protection to the concrete roof. As much as you might disagree with Le Corbusier's philosophies, you might detest modern architecture and his unsuccessful attempts to conform humanity to the orders of the industrial age. But by simply having a look around, you can't deny his impact on our cities and the development of the machines we live in. This is the last video for this book, but surely we will have more to say about Le Corbusier. This book was one of his first works of literature on architecture, but we still have many things to uncover about this controversial architect. We would love to hear your opinion of his work and what you have learned so far. Thank you for sticking to the end.